we consume much of the available water on Earth. And so in the next series of lectures, we will talk about some of the impacts we have on Earth as a result of our consumption of water. And we'll start by talking about dams. Dams are particularly effective at harnessing surface water, and we find dams all over the world. They're not unique to any one country or continent. There are at least 57,000 what we call large dams scattered around the Earth, and a large dam is any dam that's taller than about 50 feet, and then there are millions of small dams around the world. To date, at least 40 million people are displaced by flooded land and ecosystems that result from putting in dams. And some major rivers, they've been dammed up so much, and all the water in those rivers has been appropriated to the point that they no longer reach the ocean. So some of these are large river systems. That water is all siphoned off as we dam up these rivers, and then it doesn't flow all the way to the ocean in its natural riverbed. So here we see a picture of the Glen Canyon Dam in Arizona, and it was completed in 1963, and this dam created Lake Powell. So you can see Lake Powell behind the dam, and it is the second largest reservoir within the United States. This dam is important for the states of Arizona, California, Nevada, and Mexico. Some of the water goes to Mexico. Okay, so some advantages of dams. They're really good at providing electricity. So within each dam, most dams have a hydroelectric system within them, and that allows us to harness electricity or energy, which we convert to electricity as the water flows through the dam downhill. So dams supply about 17% of electricity around the globe. Dams are also great at storing water so that we can irrigate crops. So dams provide water for about 15% of the world's population in terms of food production. They also provide a stable water supply. This is really important for places like the desert southwestern United States, where water supply is spotty, and so we need to be able to store up water in order to provide a steady supply of water for agriculture and municipal use. They also provide flood protection, so that kind of seems counterintuitive, but because we can store the water behind the dams, then when we get large rainfalls, we're able to kind of store it and release it slowly rather than letting it wash down the riverbed and potentially flood homes or areas along the riverbed. There are some areas where we've dammed up rivers in a series where we have these series of little lakes called locks, and with locks we can allow boats to go upstream and downstream in a controlled manner, and so that the gradient is not too great for the boats. And then finally, many of the places where we have dams that provide lakes, people like to use them for boating, fishing, and other forms of recreation. So now that we've talked about the advantages of dams, there are some, what at the time when we first started building large dams, what we might have called unforeseen consequences. Now these consequences are fairly well known, and so they're not really unforeseen, but these are some of the consequences of dams on the environment. So first of all, we have documented that dams have caused the loss of certain fish populations. And part of the reason for that is that they impede fish migration. So obviously if you're a fish and you're swimming along the river, you get to a dam, you can't keep going upstream. And so that reduces the access of the fish to feeding and spawning areas upstream. This is particularly a problem for fish like salmon that tend to spawn at the headwaters of a river, and then they go out to the ocean to grow, and then they go back to spawn. then the babies go back to spawn once they're matured. So that's an issue with salmon and other spawning fish. Dams also alter the water temperature and chemistry, which impacts aquatic organisms, including aquatic plants. And so you might say, well, how does it do that? So when you build a dam, the dam has very deep water behind it, and that water doesn't get warmed up by the sun, which can't penetrate all the way down to the bottom depths of the water behind the dam. So that water tends to be pretty cold. So rivers that are areas behind dams, the water tends to get cold, and then when that water goes through the dam, flows out the bottom end, you have very cold water coming out the bottom. And the fish that used to live in that river might not like that cold water, and so they will not thrive in those same ways they used to. So as a result, this can displace local fish populations, and it can cause other fish populations to take over. Of course, when you flood land behind a dam, that's going to impact people's homes. So if people were living in that area, in that floodplain, then their homes will be, that will go underwater. It will flood agricultural land, any land that was behind the dam, and natural habitats that existed before, and even archaeological sites. And then when we talk about hydroelectric power being very carbon neutral, it's not completely carbon neutral, so we should talk about that briefly. Of course, when you build the dam, it costs a lot of money, a lot of concrete, a lot of vehicles are used to transport materials to build the dam, so the building of the dam is not carbon neutral. And then we have anaerobic decay of organic matter that results behind a dam because, again, those lakes get very, very deep, and the exchange of oxygen into the water is not great. And so organic matter that gets into the water decays anaerobically, which creates methane emissions. And these are also not insignificant, and they lead to carbon emissions from the lakes. Okay, so two more unforeseen consequences, or now they are foreseen, we know they're not great, include wetlands, effects on wetlands. So wetlands downstream of dams used to be supplied with water and sediments as those waters rushed down the river, and it would deposit sediments and bring water. But as we dam up those rivers, less water and sediments flow downstream, and so that causes birds and also fish that depended on that river environment to die off. Particularly, we see that this impacts delta regions where rivers enter the oceans, because those areas used to be very rich agricultural areas where lots of sediments were deposited, and these are very rich sediments that can be good for agriculture. So as a result of damming up the Colorado River, for example, water often doesn't reach the Colorado Delta region in Mexico. That region is no longer great for agriculture, and actually the water most of the time does not reach that region in Mexico. So here you can see a picture of the Colorado River at the US-Mexico border. And this used to be a bustling river that large boats could travel on, and now it's pretty much dry. So they have had instances where they flood the river, they let a lot of water flow out of the dams upstream in order to bring some more sediment downstream, but most of the time very little water escapes and gets down to the Colorado River Delta region.